Quietly away from the cameras, the United States has been deporting migrants deemed persona non grata. Many of them are destined for Africa under secretive third country deportation agreements with government officials. South Sudan, 8 deportees, all convicted criminals. The deportation happened after a legal battle that saw the US migrants diverted to Djibouti for several weeks. Eswatini, 5 migrants, all of them convicts. However, the government there is facing lawsuits from human rights activists for allowing it to happen. The African nation says it is holding the deportees in solitary confinement until they can be repatriated. Attorney General Sifiso Khumalo says the cases lack merit. In Rwanda, the government in Kigali says it is ready to accept 250, with 7 refugees already there. Uganda has signed on too. Yoweri Museveni's government hasn't revealed the numbers, but insists no criminals will be accepted and all the deported will be thoroughly vetted under the bilateral agreement signed with the US. It is said Uganda will take in US deportees provided they are not unaccompanied minors or have no criminal history. But not all African countries said yes to Trump and his proposals. Nigeria, for instance, flatly refused. The country's foreign minister Yusuf Tuga said Nigeria already has over 230 million people and will not bow to pressure from the Trump administration to accept Venezuelan deportees or third country prisoners from the US. For Trump and his administration, it's a quiet solution to a politically explosive problem. For African governments, it raises tough questions. Who really benefits and at what cost? But as the numbers grow, so does the controversy. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN.
For a deeper understanding into U.S. deportations, we've been speaking with Professor David Mwanda, a professor of political science at the City University of New York. He shared his thoughts on why the U.S. is deporting migrants to some African countries, as well as what's motivating these nations to receive them.
It appears that these African countries are being used as dumping grounds for the deportees from the U.S. And also a lot of the African countries that are accepting these migrants, in this case we saw Uganda, Rwanda, Eswatini and South Sudan. These are small landlocked countries, and the US appears to be, to have an asymmetric relationship with them. In other words, the US is dictating what should be happening in terms of these migrants. But the last question is also the due process rights of these migrants. A lot of them are not able to appeal their deportations, and that's fundamentally a problem, not only in regards to international law, but also around the UN Charter and also the African Union Charter, and even some of the constitutions of the countries that these people are being sent to. And not only is this, process that Trump is engaged in very questionable legally, but he then finds a very quick way to offload a lot of these migrants, many of whom have, criminal records, and many of whom the U.S. does not want to stay in the U.S. But in terms of the African countries, their motivations, I think each individual country is different. I think Uganda and Rwanda's motivations with accepting this deal are really centered around strategic and economic interest in the DRC. We know both Uganda and Rwanda are very active in the DRC. The US and Trump administration has been interested in engaging in the DRC to acquire rare minerals in competition with other global powers. So for Rwanda and Uganda, this is a way to be in the good books of the United States in terms of accepting these migrants. South Sudan originally rejected the migrants, but then it had to accept them because of tariffs and so on. And of course, Eswatini has its own human rights questions around these migrants. And the thing there is really not being challenged. So it really raises a whole lot of questions in terms of legal and strategic issues. But it seems for both sides, the US and these countries, there's a win-win because they tend to both have their own interests. But I think more importantly, we cannot look at this migrant question outside of broader US policy. I think a lot of these countries are afraid, Uganda, Rwanda, Eswatini and South Sudan, that if they don't accept the Trump policy on migrants and accept these migrants, that they'll not get US aid, that they will not get US support in relation to criticism of their human rights record. But I think more importantly, they are terrified that if they don't accept these migrants, the US will impose punitive tariffs on them, as it, for example, has done on China, and recently as it has done on India, where tariffs have gone up to 50%. So some of these countries are really terrified that if the US imposes 50% tariffs on them, and maybe AGOA is not going to be there, it's going to cripple their economies in so many ways.